the distinguished professor of law and religion at Washington University in St. Louis, John Inatsu, from whom we'll hear 3 times today, writes this: "It was just a thought experiment. My law and religion class had turned to the relationship between school funding and the First Amendment's prohibition on the establishment of religion. The big question in this area of the law is where to draw the line between appropriate and inappropriate government funding of religious schools. The key case is a 1947 Supreme Court decision about whether taxpayer dollars could reimburse parents for the cost of bus fares to transport their children to Catholic schools. The intellectual puzzle has confounded courts for decades. If tax dollars can pay for buses, then what about textbooks, prayer books, and Bibles? Conversely, if they can't pay for buses, then what about public roads and crossing guards near schools? Law professors make a living out of posing hypotheticals, and I threw this one out to the class. The Catholic Church, as most people know, restricts its priestly office to men. That position puts it at odds with some contemporary norms about gender equality. Suppose that a city government, this is hypothetical, a city government provided crossing guards to all its public and private schools because it had good evidence that fewer school children would be hurt or killed with those guards in place. The guards cost taxpayer dollars. Could the city refuse to pay for guards at the Catholic school because of the school's views about gender? I had expected some back and forth, but I was surprised when one student dug in, yes, absolutely can refuse to pay. The school has chosen to place itself outside the acceptable bounds of society. It is not entitled to any services from the state. The state need not subsidize such institutions." I pressed further. What if the school catches fire? Can the fire department refuse to answer the call? Yes, the student responded. The school has made a choice. It can try to put out the fire on its own. Well, I asked, what if there's an active shooter in the school? Should the SWAT team just stand by and wait for the shooter to finish up? The student replied, I don't see why not. To be sure, it was just a classroom hypothetical. There was a certain logic to my students' responses. If we're serious about disentangling government from any support or subsidizing of anti-orthodox positions, then maybe we should go all the way. And even if most of us would not go that far, listen carefully to what he says next. Even if most of us would not go that far, plenty of people call for the marginalization of their neighbors in other ways. Some of us make comments that push in the direction of my students' answers. We may not want to see schools burning or SWAT teams standing down, but we would just as soon see those with whom we disagree shut up, move away, or disappear. Shut up, move away, or disappear. I happened to be standing in that place that day when a business meeting dismissed. I don't know all that happened in the business meeting, but it was evident by those coming out of the room that things had not gone well. 1 or 2 were on the verge of tears. A couple of others were on the verge of explosion. And as I stood there, I heard a man say this: there's nothing here that 2 or 3 good funerals wouldn't fix. What did Inatsu say? Shut up, move away, or disappear. The honest truth is, he's not wrong. Think about your Democrat neighbor, your Republican colleague, the ones with whom you've had so many head-to-head confrontations. Wouldn't life be easier if they shut up, moved away, or disappeared? But that's not going to happen. That shouldn't happen. And so we're left with the question, okay, then how do we engage? Do we just avoid any topics of difference? In fact, it's a question that has come to me throughout this series. Our intent in this series has been to address our hearts as Christ followers, our hearts, our church's heart. How are we to live as responsible followers of Jesus in this fractured day and time? Because of that, we haven't gotten into, as some would clearly like us to, the specific issues that are causing all the polarization. And that's a valid question. Does that mean then that we can't say anything in the attempt to be nice? No. Absolutely, we can take a stand on issues that are biblically and spiritually informed matters of conscience for us. Absolutely, we can talk about those realities and need to. The question is, how? How do we live in this space? How do we approach those realities? What ought we to bear in mind if we're not merely going to get sucked into the vortex of the anger? So I go to a passage this morning. It's a bit unusual for a sermon dealing in any way with politics. It's in the New Testament book of Galatians, chapter 5. It's an unusual passage for politics because what it's dealing with is theological debate, theological differences. I'm wondering, though, if we can, from this passage, extract some realities that might transport themselves across the centuries and land in our politically fractured space, and from which we maybe can learn as well. So the setting in the churches of Galatia was the fact that Paul had come and had preached his gospel of freedom, and many had received that gospel of freedom with great joy. We don't have to keep the law to earn God's favor. We don't have to be circumcised to belong to God's people. We don't have to expend some superhuman effort to know that God smiles on us, God cares about us, God loves us. It was a moment of tremendous freedom which they celebrated. There were, though, on the other side of that coin, those that said, wait a minute. No, you can't do that. The law is central. The law is important. Circumcision is important. You have to do these kinds of things in order to receive the smiling favor of God. And with those two positions, then, the battle lines were drawn and the fighting began. And it was intense fighting. Now, before you blow that off as being a hyperbolic statement, stay with me. So with that context, Galatians 5, verse 13, you'll notice that Paul speaks to his brothers and sisters who know the freedom in Christ that he has preached. But he hasn't forgotten about the other side, the law, either. So notice what he writes. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. He speaks to both sides in this issue, in this debate. What is curious to me is that in speaking in both sides, he clearly finds a way forward that can provide them with common ground. But before noting that, I want you to notice just how intense the fighting is. So that last line, that last verse, if you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other, is worth our attention. There's a commentary set that's been helpful to me over the years. It's a commentary set written by scholars, directly written to Bible translators. I've mentioned this at times over the years. So this is, if I'm translating the Bible from the original Greek or Hebrew or even some of the Aramaic, translating it into another language, especially into a new receptor language that doesn't have the Word of God, then this can be a very helpful resource, a very helpful tool, because they're writing and saying, this is how you may want to deal with this language, and this is the original meaning, etc. So keep in mind that that's the kind of commentary it is. It is writing about that last verse in these two pieces I want to share with you. First one, The warning in this verse indicates that Paul pictures the Galatians as furiously fighting each other. The verb translated hurting is literally to bite and refers primarily to snakes and beasts. The verb translated harming is literally devour or gulp down, again used of wild beasts. It is clear, therefore, that Paul is comparing the Galatians to wild animals. Wow. In referring to animals, remember, the authors are writing to Bible translators, telling them what they should remember. It is important to identify the kinds of animals which would normally be wild or vicious. For example, if you behave like wild animals or savage animals, hurting and harming each other may be rendered in some language as causing pain and suffering to one another. So picture this: the apostle of the heart set free, the champion of the Gentiles, the one who has helped us maybe more than any other New Testament writer, understand that God's grace is a free gift. Writes to the churches in Galatia and says, you're behaving like animals. You're like wild beasts. What are you doing? You got to stop fighting. You're going to destroy each other. Second piece from the same commentary. The result of all this, Paul asserts, is mutual destruction. You will completely destroy one another. The verb translated completely destroy is literally to consume. It is often used to describe the destruction caused by fire. The basic idea is that everything is destroyed. Nothing remains. What will be destroyed is either the Galatians themselves, as in actual bloodshed. New American Bible renders it, you will end up in mutual destruction, or the Christian fellowship. Phillips translates it, you destroy your fellowship altogether. Jerusalem Bible, you will destroy the whole community. In light of Paul's use of the present tense in the verbs, he is evidently thinking of an actual case. This means that the false teacher's efforts have resulted in chaos and confusion among the Galatian believers, and one should translate this as an actual fact. In other words, he's not using hyperbole. He's not using overstatement. He's not the parent who's saying, I'm count to 3, 1, 2, you don't get over here, ground you for the whole year, you'll never. He's not that. He's saying literally, friends, you're like savage beasts. You're going to consume each other. You may cause bloodshed. You're going to destroy the entire community that you have. Stop fighting. It's serious. Now the question is, are there realities that, generally speaking, we could transport from a theological fight 2,000 years ago into a political fracas in the 21st century in a different country? I want to suggest 3 things, encourage you to think about. Consider 3 ways in which we might transport the spirit of what Paul is saying into our day and time. 3 suggestions. Suggestion number 1, turn down the heat. Turn down the heat. Clearly, in ancient Galatia, the heat was high. They're about to burn the whole place down. Paul is trying to get them to back it off, to calm down, to turn down the heat. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that in the world, in our country, and sometimes in our communities, the heat is very high. It's time to turn down the heat. We might be interested to take note of where that heat often comes from. So a couple of weeks ago, I introduced you to a group called the AND campaign, A-N-D, the AND campaign. a group of largely African-American attorneys and pastors who have come together to say basically this: if we don't turn down the heat, we're going to destroy ourselves. We have to find a way that we as Christ followers navigate this space and not be owned by one side or the other. So it's in that context that they're writing about a study that was done. So here are their words. According to the Hidden Tribes of America study, that's the study, these tribes are group identities that represent core beliefs and reflect the fundamental ways we understand the world and align ourselves. Over the years, social scientists have recognized that people see their own groups as a strong source of self-esteem and a sense of belonging. Consequently, these tribal identities have significant influence over people's views. And now they're going to describe the spectrum from left to right of these tribes. The study breaks Americans into 7 tribes: progressive activists out here on the edge, traditional liberals, passive liberals, politically disengaged, moderates, traditional conservatives, and devoted conservatives out here on this edge. Interestingly, the 2 smallest and most extreme tribes, the progressive activists and the devoted conservatives, 8% and 6% respectively, have the loudest voice in American sociopolitical discourse because of their high levels of engagement and large amounts of money. They often frame the issues for the majority of us, who the study calls the exhausted majority. You relate to that term? I'm just sick and tired of all of this. The exhausted majority, 67%, 2/3 of us, this has resulted in high levels of polarization. Now, please listen to this. For Christians, there may well be practical reasons to affiliate with a political party or a tribe, but we run into trouble when we allow that entity to have undue influence on our values and opinions. Some Christians are more willing to defend their ideological tribe than the Christian faith. It's imperative that Christians are deliberate about avoiding partisan and ideological indoctrination. We also compromise our faith when we look to political tribes for validation simply because we want to belong. Our partisan and ideological affiliations should never become religious in nature. 67%, the exhausted majority. I suspect we have more than a few here in that. But it's not all we have. Because the truth is there are extremes on both ends that the study says is driving a lot of the anger, the division, the fracture, driving a lot of it. Maybe it's time for the 67% to say enough. Enough. We've got to turn down the heat. We have to have constructive conversations, constructive dialogue. We have to talk. Yes, you have an absolute right to have a scripture-informed, a spirit-informed conscience and to stand for and to contend for those issues, but let that be something that is driven by the merits of your position rather than by the attacking of the other person. How's that possible? You may remember this from Sabbath School. Some of you went to Sunday school. If you learned memory verses in that setting, you likely learned this one. This is in a paraphrase, but you'll remember the verse, Proverbs 15. A gentle response diffuses anger, but a sharp tongue kindles a temper fire. So when somebody comes out with fists up, ready to engage, if we put ours up, a temper fire. Maybe it's time to turn down the heat. That's precisely what Paul is trying to do in ancient Galatia. You are about to destroy each other, destroy your whole community. Suggestion number 1. Suggestion number 2, not only turn down the heat, but number 2, tone down the rhetoric. Tone down the rhetoric. We're in a space in our country where we tend to use the most extreme language, the most extreme comparisons, the most extreme and offensive words to try to rile up the base. I want you to listen to, again, the AND campaign, what they say. Our partners often try to convince us that our opponents are so evil and the moment is so urgent that to question the group's tactics or to refuse to endorse its strategies is to do a great disservice to the cause. This is ends justify the means thinking that we as Christians cannot accept. Under no circumstances should Christians blindly follow our partners or overlook immorality and bad tactics or strategies for the sake of the movement. We must never surrender our values or forgo critical thinking in our partnerships. I say amen to that. We have to thoughtfully engage. There are times when I agree with this issue on this side and times when I agree with this issue on this side, not because I can't choose, but because I can. I can look and say, this is right, this is moral. The rest of that, I'm not endorsing any of that because I belong to one who helps me think these things through and not be owned by a human institution. A second quote from Inatsu: not every policy proposed by the other side is pure evil or inhumane or heartless. If we can't find a way to tone down our rhetoric in the face of painful but commonplace disagreements, we will find those rhetorical resources have lost their meaning when we need them most. The story of the boy who cried wolf. We all heard it as kids. And yet now everyone is screaming wolf. When the day comes when the wolf is truly at the door, we won't listen. The rhetoric has been so intense and so polarizing. That can be dangerous. Dangerous to communities, certainly. Dangerous to relationships. On occasion, tragically dangerous to life. So I'm going to suggest that maybe we can take a lesson that we've learned in one domain of human experience and transport it over to this political domain about which we speak today. So over here in this domain of human experience is marriage. There's a group up in the Northwest headed by John Gottman, a name very familiar probably to many. Gottman and his crew have written a great deal in the academic space as well as in the public arena. They've been studying marriage for decades. What makes marriage work? What causes marital breakdown? They've given so much time and attention to this that they've arrived at a place where they can, based on a fairly simple instrument or based on observation of a couple's conversation and conflict that doesn't even last that long, they can predict with right around 90% accuracy what couple will be divorced in 15 years, which one will still be married. It's kind of scary, actually. They can predict that. And much of it is based on how they do conflict. So Gottman and his colleagues say there are 4 conflict styles that are so negative that if a couple consistently engages in these, they are headed to marital disruption and could be headed to divorce. My interest today is not to talk about all of those, but to mention one of them. It's the one that Gottman says is the single most reliable predictor of divorce. It's the worst of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's the one called contempt. Contempt. Contempt is what attacks the person, not the issue. Contempt is what demeans and even dehumanizes. Contempt is a spouse saying to the other, "What is wrong with you? Were you raised by wild animals? How old are you? 3 years old? What is your problem?" It's that demeaning kind of talk that disrespects the other to the degree that they feel at times worthless. Gottman may be the last step on the road to the divorce court. I wonder if that research and that reality in this domain of human experience may not also apply over here. Because we have our leaders from the highest offices in the land right on down, senators, congresspeople as well, on both sides of the aisle, speaking of people in the most degrading, dehumanizing of terms. Entire groups of people being spoken of in horrific ways. People being called horrific names. Demeaning, contempt is the word. I fear. This is my own fear. I'm not a prophet or the son of one. But I fear if this contempt continues and escalates further, we are threatening our public square because we can arrive at a place where we will not be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It's time to tone down the rhetoric. And let it start with us. Let it start with us. I got off of social media. Don't belong to Facebook, Instagram. I got off of it some years ago because it had become a black hole for me. And I decided I need to do this for my soul. Now, I know there are people out there who say, how do you pastor a church on a university campus without social media? Say, well, you're probably right, but I have a soul, and I have more peace, and I need that. But I will have people send me things, and I will read from those spaces things that members of a community I love have written. Terrible things. I think we each need to search our own hearts. Because when we are in the privacy of our office, our bedroom, typing on a computer screen, typing into our phones, that's when a lot of who we are comes out. Friends, it's time to tone down the rhetoric and to find the fruit of the Spirit, which just a few verses from the verses we're looking at today, Paul writes about: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Turn down the heat, tone down the rhetoric, and finally turn off the screaming. The screaming. Turn it off. I want to say that I do not believe it is possible to spend hours on end watching MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, or whatever your preferred conveyor of information is, and still maintain the heart of Jesus. There is just too much screaming going on in the public square. One last time in Natsu, he says, shortly after the 2016, so this has been some years ago, 2016 presidential election, I gave a public talk on religion and politics. At one point, I made some comments critical of Donald Trump, drawing largely from his own words. I was somewhat startled when a man in the back of the room stood up and started yelling at me. Everything you've said about Trump is a lie. He was the only candidate worthy to be president. The man continued, how much do you know about the Clintons? I've studied the Clintons for years. They murdered 80 of their friends and associates, and we cannot have a murderer in the White House. I am not easily tongue-tied, writes Inatsu, but I was unprepared for this kind of engagement, the move from political bias to alternate reality. 2 days later, I experienced the other end of the spectrum. Some students at my university, upset about the election, began venting on social media. Some of their comments were within bounds, others were not. Several students opined that anyone who voted for Trump was a racist and deserved to die. This was another form of engagement, for which I was unprepared. Absolutist claims about the character and worth of millions of Americans. So Ignatzu says this: we can tolerate differences of opinion. We can tolerate different interpretations of complicated and contested circumstances. We can even tolerate at the margin some hateful people. But if we allow our partisanship and echo chambers to intensify, if dangerous and disingenuous news sources perpetuate falsities that reach broader audiences, then we will soon find it impossible to maintain any kind of shared discourse. We will find ourselves headed toward chaos. You know where chaos was present? Ancient Galatia, where the apostle of the heart set free is saying, stop behaving like savage beasts. What are you doing? You're going to destroy your community. Ignatzu is saying, essentially, if we don't turn down the heat, tone down the rhetoric, and turn off the screaming, we will never be able to have civil dialogue and conversation. So, suppose we do that. Suppose we say, well, maybe those suggestions, generally based on the Galatian experience, are worth trying. And you suddenly find yourself with all kinds of time on your hands. Well, what am I supposed to do with all this time I suddenly have? What do I do now? Well, Paul has a really good suggestion. He says, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. There's a world out there desperately needing to be loved. There's a world of people who are lonely in a connected world, the most connected world that has ever existed, and yet the greatest degree of loneliness that we have ever tracked. There's a world out there to be loved. There are people who belong to some of these extremes simply because they're yearning to belong somewhere, to something. There are people whose families have been broken apart by political fighting. So you suddenly have some extra time on your hands. Paul says, love your neighbor. Okay, but how do I do that? I mean, that's a very general statement. How am I supposed to love my neighbor? I don't know if Paul answers it any more specifically in his writings than he does right here. I think he gives us the clear answer to that question in one line at the end of verse 13. How do I love my neighbor? He says this: serve one another humbly in love. So here's my challenge to you, my challenge to me this week. Find someone with whom we have disagreed, with whom we've had conflict, with whom things have not gone so well, and serve them humbly in love. What does it mean to serve them? I don't know. You'll have to decide. Maybe it means you sit down and shut your mouth and open your ears and listen to their story and hear how they got to where they are. Maybe you ask them to explain. Talk about. But he says, serve one another humbly. That means that down here underneath the table, you can't have a hook where you're trying to hook them into your side of the argument. It means you legitimately hear them. Maybe it means you text someone and say, can we break bread together? You choose the place, I'll pay the bill. And you eat. I don't know. You'll have to decide what it means for you. But that's the challenge. Serve somebody with whom you differ humbly in love. Because not only will you be living the greatest commandment, the one like the greatest commandment, not only will you be fulfilling what Paul says in these words, But you'll be doing something heroic. Heroic. You say, Randy, that's way overstating the case. Well, didn't come from me, actually. It came from the tennis great Arthur Ashe. Arthur Ashe, who said being heroic is very undramatic and sober. It's not defeating everyone so you end up at the top. Ashe said that's not what being heroic is. Being heroic, said Ashe, is humbly serving others. From a tennis great. Speaking of tennis, it's your serve.